Hello and welcome to Lightways at Life Astrologer with me, Anna Isabel. And today my guest is Joseph Crane. Hello, Joseph.
Greetings. Hi.
Well, I noticed that you are doing a course for the Kepler College called Progressions and Solar Arcs. And I thought, nobody's come on to talk about progressions and solar arcs yet. So
Oh,
here you
oh.
and you happily said, "Ask me anything." So,
Okay.
okay. Before we go any further, the course actually begins on the 7th of November. So you were just in time to enroll now. And I'll be sure, of course, to put a link in the description box at the end. So maybe you need to tell us why progressions are important. Why do they matter?
Because there are different ways that we measure our lives. Simply, we all measure our lives developmentally. Okay, I am 69. I will be 70 entirely in 2 months. I have gone through certain phases. And Ptolemy, followed by Shakespeare, divided phases into the seven planets. Actually, Shakespeare's omitted the sun, but I'll forget that for the moment. There are other systems in which, looking at the astrological chart, you can divide your lifetime into larger chunks. It's more personal. What progressions do is they help divide our lives into areas that are governed not by the outer planets like transits tend to be, the inner, more personal planets. So secondary progressions take 1 day of planetary motion per year of your life. So, Anna, if you are, let's pretend you're 31 years old, this will be 31 days after you were born. And so what's going to happen is the moon phases will change, planets will move into different signs, aspects that are remote will come close together. Planets that are retrograde could go direct or the other way around. And all of these are ways for us to look at life situations, not in an event-oriented way necessarily, but in terms of progress. It's almost like the birth chart is this 12 handle clock that everything moves at different rates. And so we are moving at different rates. So, for instance, I have moon in Sagittarius. For 2.5 years, every 2.5 years, my moon will change signs. So if it's in Pisces now, it's going to be a different flavor for 2.5 years than, let's say, the moon being in Leo, let's say. So that's secondary progressions.
I really like the way that you described that because that's pretty much the way I look at progressions. I look at it as being indicators of the development of an individual, and I think it's a really interesting thing to consider because when we're looking at a chart, at a birth chart, it seems very static. And then, of course, we look at transits to see about events and things, but we as individuals are not static. We do evolve. And I think it's a fascinating thing to consider that if you begin life as a Taurus, you're also going to spend a good chunk of time with the sign of Cancer. And I think that that's a very important thing because as an earth sign, to go through the plodding of earth to the quickness of air and then the sensitivity of water, I think that's wonderful. And equally, if you're a Gemini, to just have that quick air element and then more sensitive at some point and then be more practical or actually fire would be next. So it would be that fire of Leo. I think this
Yep.
is good because how else are we going to grow?
And also, our lives have phases, not just random events that happen to us. Of course, that happens too. But we go through times of, I don't know, being in love, of being out of love, of grad school and being intellectual, of being poetic, of working really hard. And so astrology can capture some of that dynamic. Um, I'm afraid that with transits, what we tend to do is focus on exact moments, and we sometimes lose the fact that exact moments have a rising and a culminating and a falling. Then they think that it's over and they come back. And I think Rudyard talked about transits as more sort of what happens to us, and um, secondary progression is more as like a creative kind of unfolding of ourselves. And I tend to look at it that way as well. Now, solar arcs are going to be different, but what makes progressions is that all the planets move at their own rate, but they're going to move. If it's a day per year of your life, they're going to move at very different rates. Pluto's not going to do much unless you have a extremely long time.
Yes, extremely long. I find it most interesting when there's that change from one sign to another, the point at which the ascendant changes signs. Um, and I and even something like Jupiter changing signs, I find that very interesting because it's almost like there's a marked difference in perspective for the individual, um,
Mhm.
a different view of the world, a different set of, I don't want to say values, but putting your faith into something that you didn't put your faith in before because your perspective has changed. So I find that very, very interesting. Tell us about the progressed moon because obviously that's the fastest moving one, and
Yes.
and it's every 2.5 years roughly that you're going to change that sign.
I think there are three ways of looking at the progressed moon. One is the sign they're in. So as I said earlier, if I have moon in Sagittarius, it's going to be different when moon goes into Taurus. It's like, who, me? How did I get so materialistic? Why am I so concerned about security and safety? I'm usually adventure seeking, that sort of thing. Um, we also have the moon as it aspects other planets by progression. And sometimes that can be important, especially if the moon moves every one sign every 2.5 years, it means it's going to aspect a lot of planets within that period of time. So it could conjunct Uranus, it could square Saturn, it could oppose Venus. And so you can get something of short-term kinds of things there. Are you going through a Venusian period? Are you going through a Neptune period and you just can't focus? That sort of thing. The moon representing sort of our day-to-day lives, not the big stuff, but the small rhythmic stuff that keeps us attached to this planet. Then there's the sun-moon phase. And um, you can look at progressed new moons, quarters, half moons, third quarter, or you can divide them into eighths if you're that into it. Um, and that's something I pay attention to because that will have to do with the waxing moon with a gradual unfolding of some kind of purpose, waning of some kind of fulfillment, and diminution of some kind of purpose. And of course, it depends wholly on the context that our client gives us. I like to use my progressed new moon when I was 32 as a really good example because I was living at a meditation center at the time, and I had a single room and a girlfriend. who was studying astrology. And I had no inclination, interest, or idea about what astrology was other than I was a Capricorn. So I start reading her books just for kicks because I was, it's like something to do. It's like when you're in a meditation center, you don't have many forms of entertainment. So what happens is this sort of random event builds and builds and builds. And like the moon moving into visibility, my career as an astrologer moved into visibility. Um, and then I could actually look at its progress through the different phases. Um, but the important thing about a progressed new moon is things happen that you don't notice because you can't see the moon. Then it becomes this little crescent in the sunset after the sun goes down and gets on from there. So you can talk about the progressed moon in terms of sign, aspect, or of course, the lunation cycle. So that's a lot of fun. And I always, when I look at a client's chart, especially a new client, okay, what are your transits now? Okay, what are the progressions lately going on? And that gives me, the transits gives me some idea of what's on the surface, the progression, something about what's underneath the surface.
So to clarify, for those who are new to progressions, what do you mean by the progressed new moon? Do you mean that it's conjuncting the natal sun or a progressed sun, or what exactly do you mean?
Oh, good. I'm glad you asked me that because I'm a big fan of progressed to progressed. So if you were born at a full moon, when you were 14, you would, or so, you'd have a progressed new moon. So it's always progressed to progress. Some astrologers, actually, most astrology books on progression seem to talk about progress to natal. I tend not to, for a very simple sort of reason of economics. Transits seem to cover a lot of the events that occur in our lives. Progress to it'll feel a little too much like transits. I'd rather use progress to progress because it has a certain kind of integrity of its own. But different people, astrologers, will do it differently.
Good. So it's good to have that clarification. And on the subject of terminology, could you please clarify for the audience that those who are again new to progressions, these are called secondary progressions. So what are primary progressions?
If you're new to astrology, you don't want to know. But think of it this way. In a natal chart, there are two directions. One is from sunrise to noon to setting to sunset. Go the opposite houses, opposite the signs, but we always can use that as a reference. That's primary motion. Secondary motion is through the zodiac. So when we talk about secondary progressions, we talk about movements through the zodiac. If you want to talk about primary, you talk about primary directions, which is an ancient technique that helps explain how we progress the ascendant and midheaven by secondary progressions. I won't get into it here now. And Anna is really pleased that I'm not. And it's a very interesting field of study, and there are some astrologers who actually work very strongly with primary progression, primary directions. And the difference between a direction and a progression, progressions move planets at their own pace, directions at some previously determined rate. So solar arc directions move everything from the ascendant to Pluto the same motion as the progressing sun.
So this is everything is moving at the same pace, which brings us then to solar arc directions, which is the other part of the course that you're doing. So tell us about solar arc directions, and why are they useful?
Okay. In the course, I start as a California astrologer, and I start with secondary progressions and the lunation cycle. Then I become a Hamburg astrologer, and that's when we use solar arc directions. And solar arc directions are much more specifically event oriented. They have to do with the interaction between planets going the same rate as the progressing sun and natal planets. So, for example, something I've been looking at and I'm a little worried about. Kamala Harris has an opposition between her sun and her moon, between 27 degrees of Libra sun, 27 degrees of Aries moon. Guess what? Saturn is at 27 degrees of Aquarius. She is 60 years old. By solar arc direction, her Saturn has moved 60 degrees from 27 degrees of Aquarius to 27 degrees of Aries. So her solar arc Saturn is right on her moon opposite her sun. That's how solar arc directions work. So I have bad news or I have bad news for Kamala Harris. The bad news is she'll be not elected president. The other bad news is she will be elected president. I think she'd prefer the latter, and personally, so would I. But Abe Lincoln had the same problem. Do you want to be president during a civil war? Not necessarily.
Yes, I think that's a very good example of how it works mechanically as well. So
Solar arc directions are very mechanical.
yes, they are. It feels like a clock. When I'm looking at them, it feels like a clock.
Yes.
And it when we're looking at it retrospectively at events, so if a client comes to us and we're using solar arc directions and we can say, at the age of, and at the age of, it's a very interesting thing because the person is quite, wow, is quite impressed.
Sure.
Because how it does, how specific it can be and how precise and it can be. Which brings us to the function of prediction. And what do you feel that you're wanting to achieve when you're looking at events through solar arc directions?
It's all context. If Kamala Harris wanted to come for an astrology reading, I would be delighted. And I would say, okay, let's say it was last year. Next year, you have this particular solar arc direction that involves, and I have a chart there and a little bi-wheel. And now this guy is Saturn, that's your moon. Moon is very comfortable in Aries. It's very active. It likes to emote. Saturn makes it disciplined. Now, depending on what your life is like, this can mean different things. It can be a repressive kind of thing. It can make one insecure. It can also make one very focused and may put a bit of a damper on the fiery quality of, let's say, Moon and Aries. And so at this point, we're conversing. So we have some kind of a exchange of ideas on what this could be about. So in prediction, I'm not a Delphic oracle. I don't just pronounce things. But I work with a client on, okay, what's the trajectory here? What have you been through? I could add how long things may last, how they may change. Um, so,
And I think, there's a depth to working in this way that is beyond the, as you put, the Delphic Oracle. And because one of the things that oracle was famous for was ambiguity.
yes.
And and people reading, it's the whole thing about
As long as the gases still worked.
yeah, and it's the whole thing about Oedipus, isn't it? He interprets it one way and ends up, well, in great tragedy. And that's always the way. And even within the story of Saturn, when he castrates Uranus, and he's told, well, this is what's going to happen to you. It's your fault, what you did to your father. So he decides to eat his children, and thereby creates the circumstances by which he's going to be overthrown. So there's always that thing about how we deal with prediction. And if we are not careful and we are too prescriptive, we can create problems.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas
Absolutely.
what you're saying is we can actually make sense of the present.
Right.
And which is one reason why sometimes clients say to me, oh, I'd like to have a forecast. And it's like they want it for the next 10 years. No, we're not doing that. I'm
Yeah.
not doing that. I'm very happy to look at the year ahead. And
Right.
so
Right.
that we can understand.
That'd be like predicting 10 moves ahead in a chess game. You don't know what other person's going to do.
Yeah. And that's the thing, is that at least right at this moment, we have a context that we can work with. And that helps us to understand and see the possibilities that are available, which is a very important part of it all.
Right. Why else would people spend money to talk to me? Unless they had to do with some situation in their life otherwise they solve their problems. Why talk to me if they can solve it themselves? If they're really wondering what the hell is going on, it's like, give me a call, send me an email.
So, in the course, what is it that people can expect to find? Are they going to have loads of homework? What's going on with this course? How have you structured?
Okay, all right. Um, we have presentations. So I give lots of chart examples of various people and um, how secondary progression solar arcs worked also with, how they coordinate with transits, with solar returns, but focusing, of course, on the secondary progression of the solar arcs. And I have a bunch of examples for that in the presentations. We have a forum in which I will ask people to pick somebody's themselves is fine. No ex-partners, that's a little dicey, but people they know well. If they're like big David Bowie fans, they can choose David Bowie if that's where really turns them on, fine. And share that in the forum. And as we go through a particular thing to look at, how does the change of ascendant signs manifest in this person's life, or does it? Then I pick three people in a not a forum, but the assignments to actually go to pick one of the three and go through their lives. And I've picked Angela Merkel, I'm drawing a blank, um, Alan Turing, and Julia Child. Three, people who've had ups and downs of life, and they're interesting people in their own right. And so that's the assignment. People do that privately, and I, give them feedback. And at the end, people are invited or welcome to, or I will volunteer them to, if they're good enough, make a presentation to the group.
Exciting. So
So it's not a whole lot, it's not a tremendous amount of work, but I do want to give people a lot of hands-on practice using that. And it's up to them how they will use them in the future.
because I think the thing about astrology is that it's by practicing that we learn, and my students get a little bit of a shock because on the very first lesson I get them working. And all they're doing is working with sun signs, but I've got them working because that's just the beginning. Just to get them into working with the symbols and what that might represent and what that might mean. And I think it's always the most exciting part of the lesson is that practical part. And it's through that we progress to the point where I have students who are actually, doing readings for volunteers. So this practical part is crucial, and it's lovely to see that you are giving people the opportunity to do that.
How else we learn to combine information and intuition and empathy? They all have to come together.
Indeed, that is the art of astrology. People think that the art of astrology is the discipline itself, but it isn't. The art of astrology is the bringing everything together, as you have actually described there, Joseph. So that's wonderful. You mentioned solar returns, and it reminds me that I was going to ask you where solar returns fit in this model of prediction.
Solar returns are wonderful for specific areas. So I just talked with somebody a little while ago. Health is an issue. Excuse me. And so I look at a solar return, first house, shape, the body itself. Sixth house, will I get sick? 12th house, maybe there's something chronically going on. And so we have with transits a sort of a general sense of energy and where it's coming from and where it's going to. Progressions give us sort of phase development, and solar returns give us specific information. So I have a client who's has had some difficulty with her kids, and I noticed, Mars is in Leo in the 4th house. Okay, time for you to sort of be much more proactive because of what the 4th house emphasis is, and the Mars in Leo aspects her Mercury in Sagittarius is just perfect for, okay, let's take matters into your hands a little bit more. So that's the kind of thing I would use solar returns for. And of course, there's the quote, rule of 3. You like to see things echoed throughout different techniques. So sometimes I'll say, everything I look at is like Mercury sticks to the wall. We got to talk about everything having to do with Mercury. Is it your business? Is it your communication? Is it your language acquisition? Let's talk about it.
Those very words pass my lips very regularly. Everywhere I look. So yes, that's one of those things. And it's also a great thing for students because when they start seeing the same thing crop up, it's much more reassuring than the opposite when you get contradictory.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there are times in which I'll look at a person's transits, progression, solar arc, whatever, solar return, And it's just easy. It's like, I know I know what we're going to talk about. I don't know. I'll ask questions. We'll get the specific information, but I have a focus. There are times in which, however, especially these days with like Saturn and Jupiter and square to each other, they often at transit the same planet. It's like, okay, we're gonna have a topsy-turvy time here.
Yeah, living through that one right now.
Okay.
So yes, indeed. And that's the so that rule where you see things cropping up again and again and again is a very reassuring one. And yes, of course, there are many times when we get the contradictions, and that's quite normal because life can be a very contra.
We are contradictory.
Yes, we are.
I'm okay with that. It took a few decades of my life.
Yeah, we are walking paradoxes at times. So that's just the way it is. Well,
Or
just
as or maybe you know Walt Whitman's famous line in Song of Myself. Do I contradict myself? Well, then I contradict myself. I am large, I contain multitudes.
oh, I like that.
Hmm.
I like that very much. I am large. I contain multitudes. I love that. That's wonderful. Thank you so much for your time and for telling us about these very old means of predictions and looking at the charts. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Thank you for a fine half hour or so.
And now, if people want to join this course, a reminder that it is called Progressions and Solar Arcs, and it begins on the 7th of November. So there is time. I'll be putting a link to the Kepler College and the course in the description box. But if people want to find you for a more personal one-to-one reading, Joseph, how do they do that?
Okay. Well, first of all, I want to have this interview also included on the Kepler course site. So we'll talk about that later.
Yeah,
But I'm at joseph.crane2@gmail.com. And really easy, astrologyinstitute.com is my website. You can read many articles. It's a rather large website in terms of content.
fantastic. Thank you. And you were going to say something.
Nope, I'm
No.
done.
Okay. All right.
All right, bye-bye.
Thank you all for watching.
All
Next
right.
time, we're going to be looking at the cosmos, and astrology. Until then, goodbye.